stories are, what are they? Always absolutely, positively true. Very fun. My dad said that, and I'm going to say it. And at the end, I got to remember to tell you how he always ended something. That's very fun, too. Someone reminded me of that, and I've forgotten that I had done that. So I'm going to do it today, but you have to remind me how to say, instead of the end, I have a different ending. He always said he loved to do fun things with words. So that's one of the things I loved about him. So I'm dressed kind of different today because in the olden days of Israel, and even today, in the desert, they wear head coverings. Women wore head coverings, but even the men had different kinds of head coverings. Even today, they still do that because of the heat, and it helps. And there's also a respect. There's different meanings for wearing a head covering. Besides, very practical. So I'm dressed like this because I'm telling you a story from the Old Testament days from the book of Ruth. Now, some of you might know this story yourself. But I love rereading the stories. Every time I read the story again, even after all these years, I don't remember all the details. So I always learn something else because I'm in a different place in my life. So here's the story of Ruth. Now, Ruth's mother was Naomi. And Naomi and her husband, Elimelech, had to leave Bethlehem, which was part of where the Israel people lived, because there was a famine. A famine is where there's just no food, and things aren't growing. And so they were really running out of things to eat. So Elimelech took his wife, Naomi, to another country named Moab. And he went there to live because it had been raining there, and they had crops, and they could have food. So they lived there. And he had 2 sons, and they married 2 women from the country because they were living there. So a woman from that country is called a Moabite, because we are a Seattleite, we live in Seattle, and we're a Washingtonian. We have these little endings we put on. So they were Moabite women, and if the people of Israel were Israelites. So we have these little endings we put on to say where we're from. We do it here too. I don't know what you do when you're renting. I lived here. Rentonites, Rentonians. I don't know. I never said that. So all that is what they did. So the sad part was that Naomi's husband died, and then her sons died. And so she didn't, and then she had her 2 daughters-in-law, and one was named Ruth, which the story's about, and another woman was Orpah. So Ruth and Orpah loved Naomi, and they were very dedicated to her. But Naomi realized she was a widow. She didn't have any way to provide for herself. And the famine was all over by now back in Bethlehem. And so she decided to go back there because she had land. Her husband had land there, and she had her clan. We talked about clans with Achan and Ai. Her clan was all there. So she started to go back, and Ruth and Orpah started to go with her, and then she stopped. I don't think she was too far from town, but she stopped and said, she was so sad, but she loved them too. But she said, you should go back to your people and your family. What is it for you to come with me to strange people you don't know? And they had really different ways in those days to help widows and poor people and women. They had God had provided ways for them to be cared for. God was very faithful to provide. Because back then, it wasn't like here where maybe a woman whose husband died could just go get a job. It wasn't like that then. She couldn't do that. And how was she going to care for herself and then these women? And another thing that God provided was, if a woman lost her husband, then one of the brothers would marry her. So she had children. They all stayed in their clan. They were very faithful to their clan. Well, Naomi's saying, I don't have another son to marry you. We don't do that today, but that was the custom of the day. And she said, and even if I married today, 20 years later, you would be older. This isn't going to work. I'm not going to be able to provide for you. You should go back to your people. And they cried, no, 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 no. But finally, she kept insisting, and Orpah went back in tears. But Ruth, she just begged Naomi, oh, please, please, where you go, I will go. And where you lodge or live, I will live. And your God, your one true God will be my God. You know, they didn't believe in the one true God in Moab. Your one true God will be my God. And I will even live with you till you die. And should I even not do that, should there be a punishment on me? She was making a big promise. And Naomi said, okay. She saw Ruth was absolutely faithful to go with her. So they went. So they go back and they come back to Bethlehem and people are like, oh, Naomi's back. But Naomi was like, oh. And they find out all these sad, sad things that happened to Naomi. And now they were very poor. They had nothing. They arrived with nothing. And so Ruth knew another way that God provided. Our one true God is so good. He found another way for what do poor people do when they can't get jobs and they can't work. And Naomi can't. Women then didn't just go out and get jobs. So, but one of the things they did was there was a rule that if you had farmland and when you harvested your crops, you were not to harvest every little grain. You were supposed to leave some at the edge of the field so that the poor people could come and glean. Glean means they would get the little grains and they could eat for that day. So that was a provision. God was so faithful to do that for the poor. And so Naomi knew this. And Ruth knew about it. And she said to Naomi, can I go do that? She even asked, she loved her and respected her mother-in-law so much. May I go and do that? And go do that. And Naomi says, yes, that would be good because they need the food. So Ruth goes to a field. It just happens, and by the way, we know that there are no accidents with God, so when we say it just happened that she came to a certain field, we know that God directed her. He knows the details of her life, even if we don't even know that he's watching over us. So she goes to this field, and it happens to be a field of a man named Boaz. Boaz. And so this Boaz is a relative of theirs. How about that? So she goes there, and this is in April, about when the barley was growing. And so she goes there, and she starts gleaning, getting up little bits of grain, little bits. You might get enough for just the next day's food. It's about what you would get. And so, but Boaz comes back from where he was at, and he sees her. She looks different because she's from another country. She looks different. He goes, who is this lady? And his workers say, well, that's Naomi's daughter-in-law, Ruth. And he goes, oh, he heard all about her faithfulness to Naomi and her dedication to leave her people, her family, her country, and come with Naomi. And so he talks to Ruth, and he's talking with her, and he says, well, and he says, you just stay in my field because it's safer here. I've directed my workers to watch over you, because if you go to other fields, you might get hurt. Some workers weren't very kind to those that were poor. You stay here, and here's some water and some food. Come eat with my workers. And Ruth is like, why are you being so kind to me, a foreigner? And he says, I know your reputation. I know how faithful you have been to Naomi, and everybody knows your love for her and your dedication, her character, and what a godly woman she already was. And so when at the end of it, and he even directed his workers, he said, look, don't take everything, kind of leave more behind where she's at. And he told her to even glean amongst not just the edges of the field, but with my workers. She was finding all this favor, and just leave some behind. So by the end of the day, she had way more than a little bit. She went home with, like this is, well, it's in a bag. I don't think it was in a plastic bag back then, but I don't think so. It didn't say Natural Grocers either. But anyway, she had the barley, and there was enough here to make a lot of bread, not just one day. And she went home, and she had it in her shawl, and she would take her shawl, and you could also, see, these were multi-purpose. These were great. You could put it, if you were cold, they had another one that they would wear beside the one on their head, and they put it around. And so she took it home in her shawl, and she showed Naomi. And Naomi's like, wow, tell me the story of the day. So Ruth tells her all about it. And Naomi goes, oh, Boaz, he's one of our relatives. In fact, he's called a redeemer. A redeemer. That meant he was someone that could help them a lot. And we'll learn more about what a redeemer does. And so you keep working in his field. So she did. She went back every day and worked in, hands down, worked in his fields all the way through the barley harvest and the wheat harvest every day. And she was so safe and they were well cared for. Well, all this time, Naomi's thinking about this because there's something special about Boaz and him being a kinsman redeemer. Kin is like another word for family. Hey, they're my kin. So he was a kinsman, and he was a redeemer because he could, when you redeem something, you take it from where it was and make it in a better position. And he could do that. How could he do that? So Naomi tells Ruth that he's a kinsman redeemer. Can you say that? Kinsman redeemer. Kind of a big two-name for him. So Boaz was, what that meant was you're one of your closest relatives. Another thing that they provided, God provided for the women who were widows and didn't have anybody, like in Ruth's case or Naomi's case, that the one that's kind of a closer relative could marry her so that he would take care of her. And he was a redeemer. He was someone that could redeem her. Like if you redeem something, you're getting it back. Getting money for it, or if it's something you're going to redeem, like if you buy something, you might redeem it. So she said he's a redeemer for us, and so you can. Here's what you do. Here's the other crazy way that they provided. This is what they did. If a woman was in that position, here's what they did. She would go at the end of the harvest. She said, "Get yourself all looking beautiful and clean. Anoint yourself. Put some. Get all." Lovely. Not that she was but she would put her shawl on, and she had the one on her head, which I'm not going to do for the microphone, it's causing problems. All right, and you go they would celebrate at the end of a harvest. Lots of places celebrate. I know many places that celebrate. That's why we have Thanksgiving, because it's a celebration of the harvest. And so you go at the end of the harvest, you come quietly, and this is what they did. This is truly the way they did it. You lay quietly at his feet and uncover his feet. What? That was a sign, and they all knew this. That was a sign that you were asking if he would redeem her, marry her. That was totally legitimate. It was the way they did it. I'm glad they don't do it that way now, but they did that way. So she did. She waited, and it was dark, and they were celebrating, and then finally Boaz. And they would sleep by the grain to protect it from thieves taking it. So they were all sleeping there. And finally, when it was dark, he lay down. She tiptoed in, lay down at his feet, and uncovered his feet. Well, sometime around midnight, I think his feet got cold. He woke up, and in kind of the moonlight, he could kind of see someone was there. And he goes, "Who is that? Who is here?" And so they're talking. She says, "It is me, Ruth. Will you redeem me?" And he knew what that meant. It meant she's asking him to marry her. That was actually legal, and that was okay in this situation where she didn't have anybody. And he knew that he was a redeemer. He said, "Yes, I will redeem you. But there is a relative that's closer than I am to you in terms of relative. We need to ask him first if he wants to redeem you. But if he won't, I will." And he says, "But just stay here because it's not safe for you to go home in the dark. There's people out that could hurt you. You stay here." Then just before it got light, when no one else would see, he didn't want her in any way people to talk about her doing anything that she shouldn't do. He said he filled her up with more grain in her shawl, and send that home as a promise. This was like a pledge so that Naomi would see that he was serious. He meant it. And back then, they always gave something to the bride's family. When you were going to marry them, they would give gifts to the bride's family. So it was a bridal gift in that sense. So Naomi knew he really meant to do it. By taking this home, they could know. He says, "I will go to the marketplace tomorrow, and I'll find out if the other man will redeem you as a closer relative." So she goes home with all this grain, And Naomi says, he is a man of his word. We will just wait. So the next day, Boaz goes to the city gate. Now here's another thing that's different than us today. We have county buildings and city important administration buildings for the capital of the United States. We have buildings where we have meetings, leaders to have meetings and to make decisions. Okay? Well, they didn't. They met in the city gate. So he had made sure there were 10 men there, plus the leaders, and he proclaimed what his question was. So they would make decisions at the city gate. So he said, and the other man was there, the Redeemer, the other closer one, and he said, okay, so Naomi is here, we know this, and she has some land to sell, the land that belonged, so she could have money. So she had this land to sell. And he goes to this other Redeemer and says to him, would you like to buy the land? And he goes, yeah, I'd like to buy the land. That'd be good, yeah. And they wanted to make sure the land stayed in their clan. Remember, he learned about clans, because he didn't want to ask anybody. In any case, he wouldn't ask just anybody to buy the land, because they want the land to stay with their family group, their clan, and always stay with the clan. But, so, the guy wasn't surprised. He said, yeah, I'd like to buy that land. That'd be good. And then he says, well, I thought he was pretty clever about this. He kind of told him one part. He agreed to that. And he says, well, when you buy the land, you also get Ruth, meaning you will marry Ruth. And he's like, oh, marry Ruth. This wasn't he didn't like her, but that was going to cost him more money. He says, I can't do that. That's going to cost me more money, which will take away from the inheritance from my family. Like, okay, because when he bought the land, it stayed with Naomi. I mean, there's some like legal thing about that, but basically he's like, that's too much. I can't do that. And he just said, okay, you Redeemer. So Boaz says, yes. Now, here's another weird thing. They had so many words. I love the fun things in this book. They do things totally different. So then, instead of here, like you shake hands or you sign a contract to say, yes, I promise to do this, stamp it, seal it, all these things. No. You took off your sandal and you handed it to the other guy and said, and everybody sees. And then he makes a proclamation, all leaves. Yes, you can see, you all witness today that I am redeeming Ruth, and I am buying the land of Naomi today. And they all witnessed that. And the passing of the sandal was like a visual thing. I'm thinking, that doesn't tell us if he gets the sandal back. But I guess he didn't go home like this, with one sandal. And what's the other guy going to do with one sandal? Except maybe, I don't know, maybe they kept the sandal. If the guy reneged on it and didn't do it, they could say, I have the sandal to prove. I don't know about that part. Maybe someday can research that. I haven't been able to find it. But in any case, they passed the sandal. Everybody sees him pass the sandal. And they were all witnesses, so he really wouldn't have to keep the sandal, because we had 10 witnesses plus the leader to say, we saw that it was a promise, and yes, he did it. And so he did. He married Ruth. Now, they lived happily ever after, as the stories go. It's not a fairy tale. It's really true. But what's so amazing, Ruth has a son with Boaz named Obed. And Obed has a son named Jesse. And Jesse has a son named David. Wow. He's the one that killed Goliath. He's the one who became King David. So isn't that amazing? God even took, and then guess what? David, down through all the generations, so Jesus was born in the same line of all these. They keep track of that stuff, and it was very important. But what's amazing to me is God even put a woman from another country who was not even part of the Israelites in the lineage of the relative, of Christ. He put her in there. He was part of that. And he knew that. That wasn't an accident with God. And we can look back and say, none of us are. He has great plans for all of you. He's faithful. We just don't know what it is yet. And every day we can find out he's faithful. And, I told you I would say a different way of the end. So here's what it is. My dad, he liked to do silly things with words like absolutely, positively true. The other one he would say, okay, it's done, D-U-N, done. Now, done, just so you don't know, done is spelled D-O-N-E, but it sounds like D-U-N, done. Why didn't they spell it that way? So it sounds like it's spelled D-U-N. So, okay, it's done, D-U-N, done.
we love.